Pirate kings, pirate queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea, what is going on? Man, can y'all believe how fast time flies with this game? It feels like we just had Super Pre-release, and now we are just a couple days away from the English release of Set 2 Paramount War. And today, we're going to discuss how Zoro is a Tier 0 deck with no competition. It's not overhyped at all, and 6/29/2023, why is... No, I didn't miss a whole set! Yeah, no, I really don't know what to say about that one. I have not been able to upload in a while. I even had a spreadsheet and a slideshow ready to present when Set 2 came out, but I just didn't feel like I had the testing necessary to really gain insight toward the decks that I would have discussed. And then life just got a little crazy. Y'all know how it is. Now, on the other hand, I've still barely tested the incoming set, and I still have zero free time, but I'm not going to let a good spreadsheet go to waste, so we can go ahead and learn about Set 3 together. In case anyone isn't already familiar with what Set 3 brings us, it introduces 8 new leaders and is the first set to include yellow cards, expanding on the color's introduction in the Big Mom Pirates starter deck. The new leaders are Red Ace, Green Kuro, Green-Yellow Arlong, Blue Nami, Purple Magellan, Black Lucci, Black-Yellow Linlin, and Yellow Katakuri. Upon release, there was an immediate, uncontested frontrunner, and it was none of these new leaders. Boosted by 2 new cards, Izo and Marco, the Moby Dick variant of Edward Newgate took more tournament wins than any other deck by a wide margin, prompting Bandai to ban the Moby Dick stage card, along with Set 2 Kabaji to stop Nami from being able to play as a pure solitaire deck, but it's not like Nami was poised to be the best deck in format or anything. For this video, I tabulated all of the winning deck lists posted to One Piece Top Decks and 1ptcgblog.jp between April 1st, the day that the ban first went into effect, and May 26th, the day before Set 4's release. Sadly, I was not able to collect matchup data for Set 3 like I was for Set 1, so this time I've only got one metric to rank decks by, and that is the number of tournaments that each deck won, which you'll see at the top of each slide. I've also included an average winning deck list for each of the leaders we cover here. I've revised the algorithm quite a bit since my Set 1 video. Now, instead of solely going off of how frequently a card was played across the format as a whole to determine whether I include it in this list, I've essentially reverse engineered the combination of 50 cards that, when compared to each of the winning lists for that leader, has some number of cards that are different. And when these differences are added up, results in the lowest sum of those differences, but with more weight given to decks that won later in the format, since that period will be the most relevant to us, at least most likely, as we approach the English format. So basically, I found the list that's most similar to all the winning lists, but more similar to the later lists than the earlier list, while not just being the latest winning list. Simple, right? For real though, if you are interested in my weird Google Sheets episodes and how I came to these lists, let me know. I'd love to give a more practical demonstration of it. At this point in the game, we have 4, 5, 13, 14, 15, 23, 24, 32 leaders. And as much as I would love to spend 3 hours talking about every single one, I sadly don't have the time, and a fair amount of them didn't win a single tournament. Your time will come, Blurple Kaido. Instead, we are going to go over the decks that had at least 5 wins, just under 3% of the total in Set 3. Quick spoiler, none of them are purple. I'm really sad about it. And this gives us a nice even top 10, which brings us to number 9, Blue Doflamingo. Nah, I didn't skip anything. We've just got a tie for the bottom of our list here. Dofi is still doing Dofi things, swinging 7k, tapping 1 to turbo out a Warlord. Now, Set 3 didn't give us any Warlord-specific support, but we're still playing the usual suite we used in Set 2, minus the 1-cost Dofi that was a decent card, saw some play near the end of it, but I'm not even sure it was the most played card, but it definitely didn't see much play in Set 3. Still have our playsets of Blocker Dofi and Perona to rearrange the top of our set, along with the full set of 4 9-cost Mihawk, since It is still the closest thing to removal for big characters and a beat stick that blue has, but we do have a couple of new, generically good blue cards to add into this list. Kaya's another 2k counter with a bit more use than either of the Mr. 2s that Dofi used to run. Has some more synergy with the leader ability as well, since you get to dig deep, maybe react to any unplanned circumstances that may come up after you've done your deck stacking. Big fan of 3000 Worlds as well. The first few Japanese lists I saw ended up playing it at 4, but then the count went down to 3 near the end of the format. Either way, just being able to bottom deck a 4-cost Marco, a Kingdu, any of those big 5-cost bodies is very helpful, and blue has just been in need of removal in general. I do think that this card's best suited for something like mono blue Crocodile, who very sadly just didn't make the cut, but I have been hearing some hype from him lately, and it's something that I'm looking to test out myself as well. But since 4 can be a steep cost to play for a card without getting a body on the board, that, may shy some people away from it, but it can still hit some targets that Jet Pistol doesn't even reach. So I think that it's definitely worth running, as did all 5 of these Dofi players in Japan. Overall, Dofi can still struggle since it has trouble finishing games, and it's still got a relatively high skill ceiling, but it managed to get enough wins to make it into this video. And now for our other number 9, Smoker. A lot of the black support in set 3 is Cypher Pole specific, but brand new finally gives black some consistency by letting us search for a navy card in the top 3 of our deck and then trashing the others. Now, trashing might sound like a big drawback, but we probably wouldn't be seeing those cards again if we sent them to the bottom anyway, so it still works out. Fukuro is another one of those annoying, can't be KO'd by effects blockers like Borsellino, so he's an easy include as well. And Khalifa's probably going to get used as a 2k counter most of the time, but in a pinch she can cycle 2 cards and reduce a character's cost by 2. Japanese lists went pretty heavy on that Starry Deck Smoker, and that may be partly because of how easy it is to get a 0-cost character, with another big body from set 3, Isho. With one don't attached, he is able to give all of your opponent's characters -3 to their cost. He's a 9k body on board, and when he's played, we can rip 2 cards from our opponent's hand if they already have 6 or more. And the threat of that might make your opponent use a counter or 2 less than optimally, even if you don't end up hitting anything when you do play him. All the heavy hitters from set 2, your Admirals, Kobe, Tashigi, Suru, Impact Wave, they're all still here. Smoker does ultimately get overshadowed by the new black leader in our set, but with these tools he already has and some new power, he gets some nice versatility that can carry him through set 3. Now, number 8 is the one leader that I have been the most excited to play from set 3, Nami. I love alternate win conditions, and every now and then, it's pretty fun to be the villain, play a nice stall strategy. Now, like I said earlier, she took a bit of a hit with the Kabuji ban, but it only changed a few slots in this 30-something event monstrosity that you see before you. I've heard the term solitaire get thrown around a lot describing this deck. And while I completely see where that's coming from, and even how this might not be certain people's cup of tea playstyle-wise, I think it's not just a solitaire deck. Before the ban, play Kabuji, draw 2, bounce them back to hand, play Kabuji again, draw another 2, play another Kabuji, draw 2, bounce them both back to hand, draw 2, do that a million times. Yes, that is solitaire. But the way it's played now, countering out with events, controlling the board, managing resources, and then potentially getting to 0 cards left in deck specifically by attacking life with Zeph, and then making sure you're able to reduce your opponent's resources when you try to hit into their board so that you can get that attack through at the end? That's a game, my friend. Getting into the cards themselves, Kaya was literally made for this deck because she specifically advances your win condition, and how you use her and reuse her is going to be a huge factor in whether or not you succeed with Nami. The one Nojiko, which could be a 4th overheat as well, they're pretty close in the data there, can bounce an opposing threat back to hand, and Mr. One Das Bones can get a completely crucial 1-drop event back into your hand, or he can serve as a 1k counter to let you get out of hits more efficiently, which is again going to be key if you want to make it to the bottom of the deck before your opponent runs you out. Buggy was a relatively new inclusion at the end of the format, and being able to hit Mr. One or any of your Impelled Down events, even if it's just Impelled Down All-Stars, is always welcome. Now Zeph, that's the bread and butter of the deck here. One of the most common plays for Nami is playing a Kaya to draw 2, trash 2, follow that up with a Zeph to bounce the Kaya back into your hand, mill 2 more, and then replay the Kaya, and then overheat it back to hand on your opponent's turn. Also, he is central to your win condition because you can mill 7 if you take life with him when he has 1 don't attached. Let me tell you, getting down to 14 cards and swinging for 2 hits with Zeph and just milling all 14 of those in 1 turn, amazing, amazing feeling. Onto the events, Desert Spada is going to give us 2,000 counter and allow us to stack the top 3 of our deck. That lets us choose what we draw and what we mill, so it's ideal for those Mr. 1 retrievals. And Impel Down All-Stars, let me tell you, this card is absolutely dead in your hand, but the trigger to draw 2, wonderful, exactly what we're looking for. And, you know, rounds out those buggy searches. Why not have more targets? Why not get more cards in hand? It's kind of the thing we want to do here. Usopp Rubber Band and Gum Gum Giant Gavel are the new counter events from set 3, and they help advance our win condition, allowing us to counter 2,000 and mill 1, or counter 4,000 and mill 2, respectively. They both cost 1, but Gavel makes you discard 1 from hand, so when you have the option to take it back off of a Mr. 1, you're going to need to weigh that decision pretty carefully. Overheat is great to bounce small threats or our on-play characters, as is Arlington Breakfast. Arabesque Breakfast, that one. Love Beam, that is the go-to blue counter event, and I've had some games where I get to play all 4 of them back-to-back with the draw effect each time, and then Deathwink can get you out of some really big swings and also get you another card or 2 near the end of that game. Sanji's Pot of Greed rounds out the list, and who doesn't like drawing 2, especially when you get to trigger a draw 2. Now, even though this is a stall deck, taking life can be pretty useful since the trigger to draw 2 or bounce something could turn a loss into a win. Playing Nami is an uphill battle if your opponent routinely swings 9k and makes you routinely spend more than 1 card for each counter, but clearly she can get some wins, and I need the day to come where I can play her in some tourneys. Now, number 7 would be a very novel addition if it hadn't already made its way over to our format during set 2, but enjoy Film Kid for another 3 months before it turns into Gripple Dofi and battles Nuge for supremacy. I really don't know what to say here. Yeah. Anyway, on to number 6. Actually, there is a little more to Kid than what this slide shows. While the list that my algorithm arrived at won't really be noteworthy to players who are keeping up with the latter half of our set 2 format, Kid's wins overall were pretty diverse. We had Film Kid, Supernova Kid, Wano Kid, even East Blue Kid, and I'll throw a couple of those Kid lists in the description to show off the variety. Now, across the board, there was one set 3 card that made its way into a lot of lists, and that was Krieg. On play, you can discard 1 to KO 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, and he gets double attack when he has a don't attached. If you want to try him in the film list, you can replace Frankie with him. Kid was the most successful green leader in set 3. The color took a hit in general, with 8-cost Katakuri answering the big buys it hides behind, as well as some other new removal tools and just the sheer aggression of the top decks. But even if people are calling him Eustace Mid all the time, I don't think we've seen the last of him. Now, we'll round out the first half of our video with another leader and the best black deck of the format, Rob Lucci. When he was first revealed, I heard a lot of people underplaying his ability, and I do agree that discarding 2 is a pretty steep cost, but as we got more reveals, it became more apparent that it would synergize with the CP9 character abilities, and I see this ability sort of like Kaido's in set 1. It's not an ability that you use all the time, but it can close out games. If we compare this to Kid, who's got a pretty similar leader effect, 1 extra discard is giving us up to 3,000 more power per attack, and to me that seems like a pretty decent trade-off. Now, that being said, the deck isn't the easiest to play. It relies really heavily on effective resource management with all your KO effects, good sequencing to make the most of your CP9 effects, and speaking of the CP9 effects, let's start getting into those. Spandom is the same as brand new, but for Cypher Pull cards, letting you add one of those Cypher Pulls from the top 3 to your hand and then trashing the rest. These discards are going to set us up for more of our CP9 cards. Kaku on play lets us bottom deck 2 Cypher Pull cards to KO a 3-cost or less, and then Bluno is a 5-drop 6k that becomes a blocker with a don't attached. And then when he's KO'd, he can then play a Cypher Pull character that costs 4 or less and rest it. And this is good for a bunch of things, not just bringing out an extra Fukuro. In one of my first games against Lucci, my opponent used the Bluno to resurrect a Khalifa, then reduced the 5-cost character that I needed to swing with for game, then KO'd it with an impact wave on my next swing. So he can do some really sneaky, assassin-like plays with these cards. We also have 2 copies of Erdor in this list, which lets us look at the top 5 of our deck, play a CP9 character that costs 5 or less, and then send the others to the trash. This is one of the cards that I'm a little on the fence about, since you're essentially going negative on Doan unless you hit Kaku or Bluno, and it feels like the deck has enough ways to fill the discard at this point. At the same time, it's got a pretty busted trigger that resurrects a black character as long as it's 3 cost or less, so I may or may not find that worthwhile after I get some more games in with Lucci. I went over the rest of these cards in the smoker portion of the video, so I won't take the time to repeat them. I do, however, just want to mention a couple of other cards that didn't make it through the algorithm, but still saw a fair amount of play in Japan. Stardeck Garp and Wanze were used in certain lists as alternate KO options, and then some builds opted for more of the vanilla CP9 agents, the Jabra, the Kumadori, and more Erdor instead of this more marine-heavy build that I've got over here. There is lots of room for exploration with Lucci. With the flexible timing of his leader ability and all the comboing it can do, he has a ton of potential. As we head into the second half, there's a good chance you've noticed that we haven't gone over any red decks yet. That's about to change. Now, number 5 is my personal favorite of the red decks we'll be covering today, Ace. There's a chance that's just a novelty, making me not actively retch when I see a red leader, but his effect is pretty cool. Whenever Ace attacks or is attacked, you can discard an event or a stage from your hand to give him an extra 1,000 power for each of those cards that you discarded. That means that 1, we're going to play a lot of events in Ace, and 2, he's going to work as a nice mid-range-ish, control-ish option akin to the way that Luffy did in the last 2 sets. And as if Red didn't have enough great cards already, let's go over a few more. Now, Izo is going to be an on-play searcher for Whitebeard Pirates cards because that crew definitely needed one, and it's completely fair that I have to wait till set 4 to get an Animal Kingdom Pirate searcher that isn't even purple. And that Izo can then be boosted to 5k with Makino. We also have Buggy, who searches for events, and since you're usually running somewhere between 15 and 19, he's going to hit pretty often. I do know that some lists run Striker. That's the new stage that lets you search for events when you tap it, either with the Buggy or completely instead of it, but it wasn't in a majority of the lists that I found, and that's why it's not going to be in this one either. Now, between these 2 searchers, your consistency is going to be ridiculous. We also play the top division commanders, Jozu, Marco, and Busted King of Set 3, New Marco. For 5 Doan, we don't just get a 6k body that also has 1k counter, but he straight up pops a character that's 3,000 or less power on play, so he's already a bigger Vista. But then he can also recur himself when he's KO'd by discarding an event. With the counter events that red decks already ran, and the now obligatory inclusion of Whitebeard Pirates for even more consistency, he's going to have the option to come back pretty often in any red deck, but especially here in Ace. Just in case you haven't been hitting pre-releases, getting into the Set 3 hype, he's the new Rush Zoro. He is the card that everyone wants. You absolutely want to get your hands on 4 copies if you're looking to play meta. Next, we play 4 of the Rush Ace from Set 2. Ace was usually seen at 2 or 3 in the Newgate list that ran him last set, but with the control elements that we get from Leader Ace, a rusher that can help clear the board is an easy 4 of. Red Luffy was my favorite deck in Set 2, and I couldn't use him in that as much as I wanted to, so the fact that I can actually use him for his fullest potential in this set, that's got me pretty hype. We then have 2 copies of 9-word Dadgate. He's by no means the focus of the deck, and he wasn't in every build I found, but he was still in a majority of the winning lists, and he can help you close out those grindier games. On to the events, we have 4 Rad Beam for totally fair counter potential, 1 Seaquake to either get an extra KO in or add 1,000 power, the 4 copies of Whitebeard Pirates I mentioned before, then 3 copies of Crossfire. This can only be used with a Whitebeard Pirates leader and lets you reduce a character's power by 4,000 as a counter or during your turn to help swing over or to Marco your opponent's board. We also play 1 copy of Fire Fist, which lets you pop a 3k and a 5k by discarding an event, along with a trigger that KOs a 5k. Also have 2 copies of Jet Pistol. Accounts for Jet Pistol and Fire Fist, those can very easily be swapped, and I'm honestly liking the single Fire Fist because it means you still have that removal, but you conserve your own resources a little more in the long haul. Finally, we have our Ace-specific event and one of the biggest removal pieces that Red has seen, Flame Emperor. It has a high cost at 7 Doan, but it does let you KO a character with up to 8,000 power, and then gives your leader an extra 3,000 power and double attack. If you're in a decent position, this can lock the game up for you, but I can also see where it might feel a little bit like a win more card. Either way, it was played enough in Japan to get a sizable count in this list, and I cannot wait to clean up the board with it and with Ace in general. We're going to come back to an old favorite for number 4, and that is Law. He is just one of those leaders that will stay as good as his pilot until he is either errated, rotates, or has a crippling ban on one of his most played cards. He's also an amazing budget pick for players since he doesn't play a single card from set 3. Even outside this list, the only set 3 card I saw in a winning Law list was a single copy of Ezo on the first day of the post-ban format. The old 1-cost gang's returning, all at 4 copies, except for Beige, who we see at 3 here. Didon and Brook are both at 4 to give us search, counter, and more chances to fill up our board to shambles, along with 1 Vista and a full 4 copies of Rush Zoro, something that we didn't see a whole lot during set 2. The starter deck and set 2 Zoros, some of those anti-Newgate contingencies we saw in set 2, did pop up now and then in the lists I compiled, but not nearly in a majority the way that the Rush Zoro did. We still run 4 of the blocker and restand Law, like Law list in set 2 ended up doing, but as we transition from the 3 costs to the 5 costs, I want to outline one little quirk of this whole algorithm I used. Since it measures the variability of individual cards, using it the way I did for other decks actually excluded any 5-cost character that wasn't either of our Law characters. Now that's not unheard of, and it could be a good way to find out how Law can best be tailored for one player's playstyle, but it's admittedly a little strange since I think 2/3 of those lists ran at least some other 5-drops, especially in the beginning and the later stages of the format. I did try running through my process with non-Law 5-drops as their own entry, and that led me to a list with 2 of those 5-drops, specifically 1 Star Deck Luffy and 1 Hawkins to keep the overall deviation as low as possible, and I really like the utility that those 2 give us as we go into those top 3 decks. In the non-extra 5-drop list, those were a single copy of set 1 Robin for some searchable board control, and then a 4th Radical Beam for extra defense. Now, the biggest change that set 3 brought to Law was a near absence of Jet Pistol and an increased reliance on defensive events, including Punk Gibson to get around those pesky little Marco blockers. That new 5-cost Marco does admittedly give Law a bit of a headache with all the removal it throws our way, but with the right build and a good pilot, Law is still an amazing deck, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Law actually had the same number of wins post-ban as our number 3 deck, but because one of these had more wins overall, both pre- and post-ban across set 3, that spot's going to go to the big donut daddy himself, Charlotte Katakuri. He's going to rep yellow for this video. That starter deck 9 Linlin leader was actually just outside the top 10. I find it kind of relieving that the yellow leader that lets you explicitly stack the top of your life from hand isn't the one at the top, and I'm hoping it alleviates some of the concerns I'd initially heard about yellow in One Piece being a repeat of security controlling Digimon. Now that being said, Katakuri's leader ability is nothing if not absolutely cracked. When he attacks with 1 don't attached, you get to look at the top of either your or your opponent's life, then put it at the top or the bottom and give him an extra 1,000 power. Let's not even consider him bringing the triggers closer to the top, or the fact that he can stop your opponent from getting their best resources from their life. He swings 7k by default, which, as we all know, that's the magic number for whittling resources down. But that, combined with the observation hockey, which is another great adaptation of a character ability by Bandai, I just want to point that out real quick, this makes him a menace. Since Yellow is completely new to the game, I'm going to try and go through these relatively quickly while also giving you the full scope of what all these new cards do. Shirahoshi lets you draw 3 and trash 2 on play, and even though she's 5 cost, you can still just get her in play through a trigger, or you can use her for counter if she shows up in your hand instead. And I feel like 2 copies is a good number where you're not going to miss the other cards if she does show up there. Strusing could give you a nice cheeky little KO on a 1 cost, but he's mainly just going to be there as a 2k counter. Brûlé is a 3 cost 1k blocker that can also come into play on trigger. And then Set 3 Pudding is a 1 cost searcher that they actually had to kind of nerf so she only checks the top 4. And that's because every card in this deck is either Big Mom Pirates or Sanji, so the entire deck can be searched out. Sanji and the Star Deck Pudding are mostly used as 2Ks, but Sanji could come down and get you 1 card deeper if he's your only play on turn 1. Perospero is an on-KO searcher, so your opponent's going to have to choose between an extra 5k swing coming their way every turn, or you getting closer to those big bomb cards. And he can also come into play on trigger, but this time you need to discard a card to get him out there. The Star Deck Peckums is honestly just another turn 2 play that lets you get a body and use your leader effect to when you get to go second. And then this brings us to the 4 cost Sweet Commanders. To start with, Cracker and Smoothie both share Perospero's trigger, so you have a lot of potential to just flood the board with this deck. In fact, that's actually the main reason Smoothie is in here. Her power buff isn't going to be the biggest factor there. Now, when you have less life than your opponent and attach a Doan to Cracker, he gets double attack and an extra 1,000, which will get some resources out of your opponent's hand. Even if he doesn't connect, even if he doesn't get the 2 life, you're still whittling them down. The Star Deck Katakuri, he's got that same observation hockey style ability as the leader, and he's the only yellow character we have with Rush so far, just so long as you're behind on life. Okay, deep breath. Time for those large family relations. 7 cost Linden from the Star Deck. She gives your opponent a very tough choice to either let you add a card from the top of your deck to your life, or to trash one of theirs. It's literally stay or life from the series, which is artistically wonderful, play-wise stressful. 8 cost Katakuri, he's an 8k beat stick, and he sends a character that costs 8 or less from the field to the bottom of your opponent's life, and he just basically dug 7 cost Kid's grave with his trident. And as if the 7 cost Linlin's choice wasn't stressful enough, the 10 cost doesn't even give someone that choice. She just burns and heals on play at the same time. Dream scenario for yellow player, just keep chaining 10 cost Big Moms over and over. She is truly a menace. Then finally, we have 2 copies each of Ikoku Sovereignty to give you 5k counter and Thunderbolt to remove. This is also great for deactivating a Marco blocker at the end of the game, or maybe even just putting yourself behind for those Cracker or 4 cost Katakuri effect. One note about Yellow in general is that Japanese players had access to the Yamato side starter deck as soon as the ban hit. And if we didn't have to wait till August to get that, we would have Narikabura Arrow, I hope I pronounced that correctly, instead of Ikoku Sovereignty, and then potentially the 5 cost 7k Yamato. So just keep an eye out for those when they come out in August, because they're very good cards. And also keep in mind that Katakuri did get nerfed a bit for the webcam tournaments. Since your opponent would be able to see what they show on their screen anyway, the effect is now going to reveal the card to both players if you look at your opponent's life. Now, giving your opponent more info does hurt a bit, but I think Katakuri does still have a chance online at least, since his effect is best used to stack your own triggers, and then seeing your opponent's life, that's just basically gravy. Now, I'm still relatively early in my testing, but I think the only reason that Katakuri is not in the fight for number 1 is the fact that Yellow has a smaller card pool. The fact that this deck has so much consistency, so much board presence, again, it just floods, and then so much pressure with those top-end abilities, I think they push it near the top. There's a reason why yellow is so sought after in this set. That was a nice little break from red, right? I really hope you enjoyed it because number 2 is Red Zoro. Yay! Now, don't get me wrong. I am very grateful that we did not have to deal with a Tier 0 Zoro format in set 2. Even though I do argue that it was never technically a Tier 0 format in Japan, but that's a flame-worthy take that I'm going to expand upon a different day. And this may just be the set 1 Kaido player PTSD talking, but I just don't want to keep putting Weenie Rush at the top. Sadly, that's just how card games are. I'm just going to have to deal with it. So the list we came to today, it's basically just Whitebeard Pirates Good Stuff .deck. But there's actually a surprising amount of variety for how to play Zoro this time around. Since Red has 4 different cheap searchers available, of which we run 3 in this list, you can tailor this build in a bunch of different directions. You can play the lower cost Whitebeard Pirates and events like we've got here. You can put Nami back in, go for a Straw Hat package. You can even lean toward a more set 2 style Magra and 9 Dad build. The only new card that I haven't gone over yet is Teach, and he started seeing play near the end of the format in Japan. When attacking, you can trash one of your characters with 4,000 or more power, and that's including the buff from Zoro's leader effect, then draw a card and give him an extra 1,000. So he turns into a 4-drop that nets you advantage and swings for 7,000 raw or 8,000 with Zoro's buff. And then in a deck that's already used to having to rebuild its board most turns anyway, sacking a cheap character that already put a hit in, that's not that big a loss. One change that's made its way through just about every variant is the sheer number of events this deck plays. The vast majority play somewhere between 9 and 15, and that new Marco is probably a big reason for that change. And then the increased counter power can make games harder to close out and boards harder to clear for Zoro's opponents. Some lists early on went for removal and Diable Jam over the Whitebeard Pirates event, but that added consistency really became the norm as Japan got closer to Set 4's release. Before we move on to the last list, I just want to mention that the algorithm gave us a nice, spicy one of Gordon at the expense of one of our Otamas, and while that seems unorthodox, there actually were a fair amount of lists that cut Otama down to 3, sometimes even 2, but playing that 4th Otama is still relatively standard as well. So unless we have something crazy come out of the woodwork, get ready to see a lot of Zoro in these upcoming tourneys. And coming into our number 1 spot is, regardless of the ban on its power card, Edward Newgate. Surprisingly, 6,000 base power and the chance to see 2 cards every turn is still incredibly powerful. Now, this isn't to say that the ban was meaningless. Even though Newgate still got the most wins, his share of those wins did take a sizable decrease. And that's something I'll elaborate on a little more in a minute or so. After Moby Dick got sunk by Bandai, most Newgate lists kept the same general playstyle of getting a bunch of searchable Chunguses on board and stabilizing with the dad of all dads, then closing out with a ton of pressure and staying alive with events and blocker Marco. So it's pretty much just Boatbeard without the boat and with Big Papa. But at least we don't have the new Marco popping boards and swinging at a raw 8k, so I will take that. There were still some Strawbeard lists that popped up here and there, and they made up about 1/6 of all the Newgate decks, but it could still be a viable choice. That being said, Newgate does have a bit of a target on his back, especially given the fact that he had so much success in our version of Set 2 compared to Japan. So, at the end of the day, anything could happen. To wrap things up, we'll go through a couple of figures here. First off is a distribution of the winning leaders both before and after the ban. Like I mentioned before, Newgate's share dropped from 24%, twice as much as the next most successful leader, to 19%, which brought him much closer to number 2. At the same time, the ban ended up giving us a very sizable gap between Zoro and everything else, so now we get 2 crazy red decks standing above the rest instead of just 1. In all seriousness, though, this is just a snapshot of the big picture in hindsight, and every metagame is going to shift and adapt as time goes on. Plus, in my experience, the fact that these other decks are all so much fun to play give me a little hope that it's not just going to be a sea of red at every tournament. Again, from my own perspective, at least. But in the interest of giving a more moment-by-moment idea of how things went overseas, I have this graph of how the wins were distributed over time. The percentages making up this graph on each day are 7-day rolling averages to give a smoother idea of the progression, and I completely understand that there is a lot going on here. But I'll point out a few areas of interest and basically go over the gist of how things flowed. When the ban hit, Newgate was still seeing way more success than any other deck, but began to drop off about a week in, at which point a bunch of the lower ranked decks took over, while Newgate, Ace, Katakuri, and eventually Zoro diminished. Then Ace shot up to the top for a few days, after which Newgate and Zoro fought for the most representation for the rest of the format. Katakuri went up and down in presence around Tier 2, and Law and Zoro finished the format out hot, while Newgate faded away. And this all tells me that Red is definitely still the king in Set 3, but that there's also plenty of room for a good player to punch up with the other colors. Except Purple. Very sorry, Iceberg. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch it and listen to me ramble about the results of a spreadsheet I have spent entirely too much time playing with. I hope the info here has helped get you ready for Set 3, whether it's a list, the trends in builds, or any wacky idea that blows my lists out of the water. I can't wait to tinker around and try some new things with these lists myself and see what people brew up once the set is officially released. If you did enjoy the video, I would be super grateful if you let me know with a like. Tell me what you're excited to play in the comments, or subscribe to know when I eventually manage to get more than 2 hours of free time to make content again. Hopefully it's less than 6 months this time. I'm going to be in a few of the online events, and I should be going to the Tulsa Regional, so please feel free to give me a shout. Best of luck if you're there. Enjoy the new format, and thank you again.